Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in AP English, and we turn now in our study of the Odyssey to book 13, Ithaca at last. We now will begin the second Odyssey, as it's sometimes referred to. It's an amazing thing to consider that we are now halfway through the poem. We've got a whole rest of the poem to go here, and really all that's left is Odysseus returns, he jacks the bad guy suitors, he's reunited with his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus. That's pretty much it, which will beg the question, well then, why does it take so many books for us to get there? I think there's a few answers to that. One is that we're going to find that we are, as soon as we get into book 13, returning back more to the Iliad and to Troy. Troy's going to be mentioned a number of times, even just in this first book of this last part of the poem. This is, however, a different kind of Odyssey. We're no longer going to be going up against monsters like Polyphemus or, mystical kinds of trips into the underworld or whatever. Rather, this is going to be a mental, a spiritual quest of a kind. And behind all of it's going to be the moral question about revenge. How much will Odysseus exact revenge for the suitors hanging out in his house for some now 3 years, bugging his wife and eating all his food up? Now, if you haven't been following our lectures, you need to get to learnstrong.net in the AP folder and find the previous lectures. Let's just do as we've done for every lecture prior. Let's do a real quick review of where we've been. In the first 4 books, that Telemachus, that tells the story of Telemachus. In the opening book, we have the Muse, invocation of the Muse. Athena is helping Telemachus, telling him it's time for you to grow up at line 340 of book 1. Telemachus in book 2 calls the assembly. It doesn't go well. He leaves with the help of Athena as mentor, and then off he goes to try and find some information. He goes in book 3 to Pylos, there with Nestor, ends up with Pisistratus, Nestor's son, on their way in book 4 to finally get some information from Menelaus and from Helen. We end book 4, and this is significant, because we end book 4 with the suitors plotting to kill Telemachus and Penelope beside herself with concern and worry and grief. Not only now is her husband left and maybe never will return, but so is her son. Books 5, 6, 7, and 8, as we said, is Odysseus' arrival at the island of the Phaeacians. We begin in book 5 with him on Calypso's island. He is allowed to leave. Poseidon tries to kill him. He ends up on the island of the Phaeacians, and there in book 6 he will meet with Nausicaa, the daughter of the king of the Phaeacians. We're going to see the Phaeacians one last time here in book 13. The book 7 is all about the Phaeacians and their amazing court, their practice of xenia, that guest-host relationship that we've talked so much about. Finally, in book 8, we'll have the Phaeacians and their games. We'll get Demodocus, the great blind bard, who's going to sing poems for us. And finally, at the end of book 8, we'll get the question that we've kind of been trending towards the whole time to Odysseus: who are you, right? Books 9, 10, 11, and 12 are the heart of the Odyssey, those flashback stories, Odysseus' adventures. Book 9, we have the land of the Lotus Eaters, and of course the blinding of Polyphemus, the Cyclops, and calling down the curse through Poseidon. In book 10, we have Ilios and his windbag. The Laestrygonians will kill all of Odysseus' men minus one ship, and finally he ends up with Circe for a year. In book 11, Circe tells him he's got to go into the underworld. That's that important trip into the house of the dead, where he meets Tiresias, his mom, Agamemnon. Of course, Achilles and Hercules are also met. Finally, in book 12, we're back to Circe's island. We have to bury Elpenor, one of their sailors who died. We go past the island of the Sirens, through Scylla and Charybdis, and finally to the island of the sun gods, cattle, where the men eat the cattle, and of course ultimately are jacked at sea. The story will end in book 13, and now we're ready for a real brief summary. Before we get there, though, just to remind, I really do hope that you're trying to read this stuff on your own, and you're using me to kind of help you through it. Our learning theory, remember, will postulate we're always trying to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. We do that in our annotative approach at level 1 by asking the question, what does this text say, summarizing? At level 2, what does the text mean? 2A, messages, themes. 2B, we've been spending our time at the rhetorical level studying specifically about symbolism and irony. We'll see a whole lot of that here in book 13. And then finally, at level 3, we ask, how can I relate to this information in some meaningful way? At 3A, how can I relate to the Iliad, since we've already done our guided study of the Iliad and then other texts that we know of. We're going to see a lot of that here. This text will begin to, book 13, will begin to direct us back towards the Iliad and the reading of the Iliad in some really interesting ways. And then finally at 3b, how can I own this text? How can I make it somehow make sense to me personally? Let's do a real quick review now of Book 13. We begin with the Phaeacians and their Xenia. Then we give one more final meal to Odysseus, and they sail him home. He goes to sleep at night while he's being sent there, and they take him off, they put him on the island with all of his Scooby snacks, the time, all the stuff that's been left for him, and then they leave and head back to Phaeacia. On the way back, Poseidon and Zeus have a very interesting conversation, and Poseidon says they need to be jacked for Xenia. They need to be jacked for the Xenia that they have shown to Odysseus. And Zeus says, do it. Zeus, the god in charge of Xenia, says, do it. And they are punished by the ship being turned into stone and sinking to the bottom of the ocean. And immediately Alcinous, the king of the Phaeacians, recognizes what's going on and makes sacrifices to hope that Poseidon won't bury all of the island of Phaeacia with a big mountain around it, meaning they'll never have access to the harbor again. Whether it happens or not, we don't know. And that's the end of it for us with the Phaeacians. Then Odysseus wakes up, back on Ithaca, at line 230, and immediately asks the same question that he's asked 2 other times in the poem already, when he woke up on the island of the Phaeacians and when he was ready to go visit the island of Cyclops Polyphemus. Where am I? What kind of things am I about to get into? He actually thinks that the Phaeacians have cheated him and left him somewhere other than Ithaca, and he actually calls down a curse on them. There's all kinds of irony here, right? And then he turns around and he counts all of his Scooby Snacks teammate money, his treasures, and it's all there. Athena, disguised this time as a young man, not as the young girl that we saw on the island of the Phaeacians, but rather as a young man. Athena shows up. Odysseus spins this amazing lie. He's a great weaver of storytelling, right? And in interesting ways, he tells a story about how he killed somebody in nighttime, and it takes us back to Iliad 10, when Diomedes and Odysseus jacked Dolan and cut off his head. You'll remember that. Go back and look at that lecture again if you don't remember it, right? Athena will change herself into a woman and will marvel. She says, you rival even the gods in your ability to lie. It's remarkable. Odysseus will ask her, where have you been since Troy? And she will say, well, here's the deal. I knew you were going to get back home, and Poseidon was upset, so I didn't want to get in the way of Poseidon. And then finally she lets, at line 400, she lets Odysseus actually see that he's finally back at Ithaca. Odysseus is landing on Ithaca. It's kind of anticlimactic. It's done when he's asleep, and then when he wakes up, he's not aware of where he is. There's kind of a mist that Athena has created around him. They will finally bury the treasure that in a cave. And this will take us back to Polyphemus. I told you there's these cycling things that happen. Back to the cave of Polyphemus. Athena will put the rock in front of the cave and they will bury it. They sit down by the olive tree, significant because of course the olive tree is the tree of Athena, and they make their plan. Athena says, I'm going to go and get Telemachus. I'm going to churn you into an old man, and I want you to go to the swineherd. He's loyal, okay? And this will, in many ways then, this book will begin the march towards book 22, which is the most Iliad-like of all of the books to finish. That is to say, where he will slaughter all of those suitors. In each book, think about this. In each book, Odysseus will be defined now going forward, or amplified by his meeting and his conversation with different characters. Here it's Athena. In book 14, it's going to be Emueus, the swineherd, and on it will go. All right, let's turn now to the actual rendering of some lines before we hit level 2 and 3. I've said this in every one of my lectures with you guys, that I would love to just be able to read all of this. This Ithaca at last, I mean, there's so many great lines here. I can't read it all, but I hope that I can at least share a little bit with you of the Phagos translation. I'm with you at the opening lines of book 13. As we return in some ways, as I said already, to Troy and the Iliad. We're going to get a lot of comments there, right? We'll begin. His tale, Odysseus' tale, was over. The Phaeacians fell silent, hushed, his story holding them spellbound down the shallowed halls, until Alcinous found the poise to say, Odysseus, now that you've come to my bronze-floored house, my vaulted roofs, I know you won't be driven off your course. Nothing can hold you back. It's a great line about Odysseus. Nothing can hold him back, meaning, of course, he is going to survive. What is the Nietzsche line? That which does not destroy me makes me stronger. Certainly Odysseus is playing that game. However much you've suffered, you'll sail home. Here, friends, he says, here's a command for all in one. You who frequent my palace day and night and drink the shining wine of kings and enjoy the harper's song, That is to say, kind of like the suitors back on Ithaca. He says, the robes and hammered gold and the whole of other gifts, Timē, if you will, your lords of our island council brought our guests. All I packed in his polished sea chest. Now, come, each of us add a sumptuous tripod, add a cauldron. In other words, Alcinous says, of all the gifts we've given you, we want to give you a little bit more. And he's speaking, obviously, to these princes. And then he has an interesting line that Marx is going to have some fun with later, obviously. Then recover our costs with levies on the people. It's hard to afford such bounty man by man. In other words, he says, I'm aware that we're giving a lot of our Scooby snacks away as the elite of the aristocrats of Phaeacia. But don't worry about it. We'll get it all back because we'll tax the poor, tax the people. This line reminds us as well that this is a poem, as the Iliad was a poem, for aristocrats. And we're not going to see a lot of common people until book 14. And then we're going to meet a swineherd. And of course, Odysseus himself is going to look like the lowest of the lowest in social strata. That is to say, he looks like an old beggar. Okay? That's fascinating because we're going to see a lot about what it's like to understand the world through that kind of a hierarchy where you've got these people who have all the money. And then if it's all right to give stuff away, we'll just tax the poor and we'll get it all back. It's fascinating. They have their last feast. Been a lot of eating in the island of Phaeacia, right? They sacrificed to Zeus. Demodocus sings one last time. Odysseus, we're told, though, was anxious to go at line 35. He says, we have a great epic simile. As a man aches for his evening meal, when all day long his brace of wine-dark oxen have dragged the bolted plowshare down a fallow field, how welcome the setting sun to him, the going home to supper, yes, though his knees buckle, struggling home at last. So, welcome now to Odysseus, the setting light of day. He lost no time as he pressed the Phaeacian men who love their oars. And then he will speak at line 42. Alcinous, majesty, shining among your island people, make your libations, launch me safely on my way to one and all, farewell. All is now made good, my heart's desire, your convoy home, your precious loving gifts. May the gods of Olympus bless them for me. It's interesting, the irony of the next few lines. May I find an unswerving wife when I reach home. He's already thinking about Clytemnestra, obviously. And loved ones hail unharmed. And you, my friends, remaining here in your kingdom now, may you delight in your loyal wives and children. Obviously, Nausicaa is there, but we have no mention of her. May the gods rain down all kinds of fortune on your lives. Misfortune never harbor in your homeland. The ironies are, of course, dark here because we know exactly what's about to happen. Poseidon and Zeus will jack the Phaeacians for what? Helping Odysseus get home. That is to say, practicing Xenia. Alcinous then will respond with one last prayer. Odysseus will speak with Arete at line 68 or so. Your health, my queen, through all the days to come until old age and death that visit all mankind, pay you a visit too. Now I'm on my way, but you, may you take joy in this house of yours, in your children, your people, and Alcinous the king. Notice the mention of your children. Obviously, Nausicaa comes to mind. But the poet is going to completely leave Nausicaa alone. So we have that one moment when she was with Odysseus and thinking maybe she had found her new husband. And that's pretty much it, other than her one line that you owe me, right? The serving women from Arete will then bring gifts, a sea cloak and the like, right? And then off we go. And then on board for the night, and we're told at line 88 or so, at last Odysseus climbed aboard himself, and down he lay all quiet. I mean, think about this. He's been telling the story all night. So he's got to be somewhat fatigued anyway, so he's going to go to sleep. As crewmen set to the oarlocks, each in line, they slipped the cable free of the drilled stone post, and soon as they swung back, the blades tossed up the spray. An irresistible sleep fell deeply on his eyes, the sweetest, soundest, oblivion, still as the sleep of death itself. We think about that famous line, to sleep, perchance the dream of Hamlet. The idea here is that Odysseus finally now is ready to go home, but he goes to sleep, which is really interesting. We saw this on the island of the sun gods as well, sun god's cattle, where he'll, at the key moment, he will decide, I need to sleep. And of course, some of this is always going to be this question about when he feels safe, maybe he's sleeping, right? Or maybe he's so uncertain about what's going to happen next. There's a lot of interpretations. Well, off they go. And we're told that at line 100, so on the ship ran, cutting the swells at top speed, bearing a man endowed with the God's own wisdom. This is almost like a repeat of the opening lines of Odyssey 1. another almost like invocation to the muse. One talking about Odysseus, who had suffered 20 years of torment, sick at heart, cleaving his way through wars of men. We think immediately of the Iliad, right? And pounding waves at sea, but now he slept in peace. The memory of his struggles laid to rest. This is, of course, ironic, given what Odysseus is about to have to endure once he arrives on his homeland, right? They get there, and they are at the harbor's edge. Odysseus does not wake up. And then we get this interesting line. At the harbor's head, a branching olive stands with a welcome cave nearby it, dank with sea mist, sacred to nymphs of the springs, we call the Naiads. We're going to get this we and you configurations that we saw in our study of the Iliad that starts to creep into the storytelling. It's almost as if the poet, Homer, is telling the story to people on the island of Ithaca. And maybe even, of course, Odysseus himself, who's to say, right? So we get then the offloading of Odysseus at line 130 up from the benches. They lifted Odysseus off the decks. He's still dead to the world. They took all of the stuff. They heaped them all by the olive's trunk. And they leave him, right, at line 140. We then get at line 143 this exchange between Poseidon and Zeus. He says, Zeus, Father, I will lose all my honor now among the immortals. Now there are mortal men who show me no respect. Phaeacians, too, born of my own loins. I said myself that Odysseus would suffer long and hard before he made it home, but I never dreamed of blocking his return. What a joke and an irony that is, right? Not absolutely, at least. Once you pledged your word and bowed your head. But now, they, the Phaeacians, swept him across the sea in their swift ship. They sent him down in Ithaca, sound asleep, loaded the man with boundless gifts, bronze and hordes of gold and robes. Aye, more plunder, the teammate, than he could have ever won from Troy if Odysseus had returned intact with his fair share. In other words, Odysseus hasn't been punished at all. This is unfair, Poseidon is saying. Zeus will say it's incredible, and Zeus will in fact say, Earthshaker, you with your massive power, why moaning so? The gods don't disrespect you. What a stir there'd be if they flung abuse at the oldest, noblest of them all. These mortals? If any man so lost in his strength and prowess pays you no respect, just pay him back. The power's always yours. Do what you like. Whatever warms your heart. Now we got to go back to book 1, line 37. The opening of this poem was Zeus defending himself against the accusation that the gods are to blame for all of the pain in the world. That Theodicy question that we'll come to in our fullest study when we meet Milton's Paradise Lost. King of the dark cloud, the earthquake god agreed. I'd like to avenge myself at once as you advise, but I've always feared your wrath and shied away. We immediately think of the Iliad in that regards. But now I'll crush that fine Phoenician cutter out on the misty sea, now on our homeward run from the last convoy. They will learn at last to cease and desist from escorting every man alive. That is to say, they're going to learn their lesson in regards to the practice of Xenia. I'll pile a huge mountain round about their port. Wait, dear brother, Zeus says. Here's what seems best to me. As the people all lean down from the city heights to watch their speeding home, strike the ship into a rock that looks like a racing vessel just offshore, amaze all men with a marvel for the ages. Then pile your huge mountain round about their port. In other words, Zeus says, hey, why don't you just take all of those men that are on that ship, kill every last one of them by turning them into stone. The ship will sink to the bottom of the ocean, and then you can destroy the land of Phaeacia by putting a big mountain around it. Well, that's exactly what happens. As the Phaeacians see this, they are aghast at line 188 or so, and they look and they cry out and they say, who's pinned our ship to the sea at line 190, right? This will remind us again of the idea that gods can jack humans at will. We immediately, of course, think of the Hebrew Bible story of Job, a story that we will juxtapose to Prometheus, obviously, right? And the reality is that the humans can do nothing about this, right? Alcinius immediately recognizes this is about the prophecy. He will say it, that it's all about the prophecy. It all comes true, he says. And then very quickly he says, let us all comply at line 205. Stop our convoys home, forever cast away, chancing on our city. In other words, well, we've learned our lesson. We'll no longer ever practice Xenia as we practiced it before. And now let's maybe pray to Poseidon and sacrifice, and perhaps he'll pity us. Pile no looming mountain ridge around our port and cut us off from the ocean. The people, terrified, lift their prayers. That's the end of it. And then we're told at line 211, 12, that very moment, great Odysseus woke from sleep on native ground at last. He'd been away for years, but failed to know the land because Athena puts this mist around him, right? And then very quickly, Odysseus will spring to his feet at line 225, groan, slap his thighs, and then says the exact same words that are said in Book 6, line 130, in Book 9, line 196. Man of misery, whose land shall I light on now? What are they? Violent, savage, lawless, or friendly strangers, God-fearing men? Where can I take this heap of treasure now? And where in the world do I wander off myself? Notice this self-talk, right? And he's ready to turn immediately on the Phaeacians, and in fact, he will say it. So damn those lords and captains, those Phaeacians. Not entirely honest or upright, were they? Sweeping me off to this no man's land. And they swore they'd sail me home to sunny Ithaca. Well, they never kept their word. Zeus of the suppliants, pay them back. He keeps an eye on the world of men and punishes all transgressors. The ironies obviously are dark, right? Come quickly, he says. I'll inspect my treasure and count it up myself. Did they make off with anything in their ships? It's hard to see Odysseus as heroic in these lines. Other later Greeks will also struggle to see Odysseus sometimes in heroic fashion because of all of his lying and his deceiving. It's all there. He then will cry. Athena shows up as a young man and will immediately have an exchange with Odysseus. Odysseus at line 260 ironically will immediately ask for Xenia, save me, I need your mercy, and then obviously ask the question, where am I? Athena will respond, through, again disguised, that this is Ithaca, the world-famous Ithaca, right? The ironies are interesting. At line 280, she says, so, stranger, the name of Ithaca's reached as far as Troy. The fact Troy gets mentioned right away is going to be significant. And Troy, they say, is a long, hard sail from Greece. And then Ithaca, heart-racing. Odysseus, that great exile, filled with joy to hear Athena, daughter of storming Zeus, pronounce that name. He stood on native ground at last. So finally he realizes that he's here. And he replied with a winging word to Pallas, not with a word of truth, that is to say, he lies. He choked it back, always invoking the cunning in his heart. Ithaca,